the cognitive processing model of performance appraisal. This is going to get at issues of how people think and how that can affect the performance appraisal that they're conducting. So, the rater might miss important behaviors, or they might see what they want to see when they observe behavior. That's important, right? If I'm not looking as the supervisor and not noticing the above and beyond service or other things that might be going on, that could affect my rating. I never saw that happen. Or I might see above and beyond behavior because that's what I want to see, when in fact it is just average behavior, right? So the rater might have some sort of biases in the way that they observe. They may have some biases in the way that they encode information about behaviors. So for example, they may not label the information well enough when they look at the behavior that occurred, and so they forgot that it happened. Now you might be thinking, what do you mean by label? But when you observe something out in the world, if you name it in a distinctive way, it's much more likely that you'll remember it. If you think about it sort of as an image, it'll be even more memorable. So like if you visualize it and really sort of tie it to other things. If the supervisor did not take the trouble to do that, which you could imagine why they might not, it's possible that they may literally just have forgotten. They didn't ever actually transfer it into storage. And so they may have missed behaviors. They may have seen it initially, but then just failed to encode it. They may label it incorrectly, and so they remember it wrong. So when it's time for evaluation, they may misrepresent the employee's behavior because they've remembered it incorrectly. At the storage point, some information may just not ever make it into the supervisors or the raters' memory banks. Like they saw it, they experienced it, they just didn't think about it deeply enough or process it deeply enough to ever get it into long-term memory. And so as far as their memory is concerned, it never even happened. They might store the wrong information. They might have been focusing on the wrong part of the environment and not notice what was going on that was relevant. Now, 2 months later, and it's time to do a performance appraisal, they don't remember it because they stored the wrong information, and that's what they're remembering. When it's time to retrieve information, so let's imagine that they actually got it into their storage banks and it is available because it is in there, they may actually not be able to retrieve it. You need really good cues for retrieving information. So now that I'm sitting down trying to write a performance evaluation, I'm thinking, okay, there were some things I saw over the year that I really wanted to mention, but I can't think of any of them. There aren't powerful enough cues here to help me to retrieve the information from my memory banks. Or maybe irrelevant information keeps popping up instead, right? Like as I'm sitting here trying to fill out a performance evaluation, things that don't have anything to do with performance is popping up. Like, oh, that funny joke that the employee told, or, other things that have nothing to do with performance evaluation. And that actually is popping up and interfering with my ability to retrieve what I want to retrieve. And then finally, there's the stage where you want to try and integrate the information and make sense of it. And if any of the things happened that I mentioned on this little flow chart, you may make a poor decision because you have all this faulty information. There's that other part where the biases that the person is carrying with them about the ratee, liking them or not liking them, can taint all the information that the rater is trying to process. So there are a lot of points at which the processing of information can become faulty. And that's something that I think if we tell raters about that, it will help to really encourage them to make better records about what they've observed and seen. Like maybe at the end of every shift, they could just have a little notepad where they write stuff down, right? Little things that maybe in 6 months when it's time for a performance evaluation, they could, file back through and find. Some now with phones and things, maybe they could have a little, list that they're keeping or something in their phone, something where it would be easy to sort of not rely on your memory, but instead record it as it's going on. It would make a lot better information for judgments at the end of the appraisal period. So I wanted to talk about some common rating errors that are due to cognition. The first one is halo error. And this, it has to do with the way that people think about each other. So rating is going to be based on some kind of general global quality instead of individual dimensions. So for example, if I as a rater feel like this person is nice, I may see them as literally having a halo on their head. And so everything that they do is interpreted through my lens of they're a nice person, they're a good person. I'm sure they meant to be on time today. I'm sure that they meant to be nice to that customer. You know what I mean? Like everything that they do is viewed through this basic assumption that this person is a nice person, instead of looking at the individual behaviors and seeing whether they really are treating customers well or following the protocols or whatever I'm looking for that I should be looking for as a rater. It can go the bad way too, by the way. We don't have an analogous term where we call it like devil error or something, or horns error or something. But if you are assuming bad things about a person, you've already got sort of this global negative judgment of a person. Pretty much everything you see will be viewed through that. And so it can cause you to rate a person more poorly because you think you already know that everything they do is negative. Now, there are some distributional errors that happen when we make ratings. Distributional errors are where we sort of think about the behavior as being, in this case, uncommon. And here's this person displaying the behavior and we're like, wow, they're doing a good job. Right? Leniency is where I'm rating them too easily compared to other people. And there are a couple of different reasons why I might do that as a rater. It might be because I want to look good. I want my employee or the person who I'm rating to have good scores because maybe I'm their supervisor and I don't want it to look like I'm doing a bad job. Maybe I want the person who I'm rating to like me. So I might give them more lenient evaluations because I don't want them to be mad at me. Which ties into that keeping the peace, right? Like it's easier just to tell people that they've done a good job than it is to give accurate ratings. So there are a number of different reasons why a rater might be overly lenient and putting their employees into the wrong part of the distribution, right? They're putting them on the high end of the distribution where they don't belong. Central tendency. This is where the raters just go down the scale and give them basically the midpoint. They're like 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, even when sometimes the person deserves a 6, or even when sometimes the person deserves a 2. I'm just going through and I'm just like 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. Could be because I'm lazy. Like I have not bought into this process of evaluation and stuff. And so I'm like, let's just get this over with. And nobody's going to be mad at getting 4s. So I'm just going to give everybody a 4. So it could just be pure laziness. It could be that they don't have enough information to make nuanced judgments. So they're like, I don't know, I guess it could be a 5, but how would I support that rating? So I'll just give them a 4. If I had more behaviors to rely on, maybe I would have, more nuanced scores that I would give. And then finally, it could be the scale design. It turns out that people don't really like to use the polar ends of the scales. So if you have a scale that runs from 1 to 7, people are pretty reluctant to use the 1s and the 7s. And so you might end up with de facto a scale that runs from 2 to 6 because nobody really wants to give a 1. Like nobody's totally horrible, right? Nobody wants to give a 7. Nobody's perfect. So then I've moved it into 2 and 6 mentally. And so I've really got like this central tendency going on. And that's because I was never going to have a giant outlier of a 1 or a 7. So it could be that kind of distributional error where people are clustering around the middle because of that. The opposite of leniency is severity. And that's where, maybe I'm, as a rater, I want you guys to think I'm going to get you. Like you need to be a little bit scared of me. I want to look tough. Some people incorrectly think that it's a great way to motivate employees, to give them low ratings, and that then now they're like, oh, I need to show them and pull my ratings up, which is not really the best motivational strategy. But some people think that'll work. Sometimes raters think that the person who they're rating is too cocky. They're too self-assured. And so they'll give them inappropriately low ratings to try and, knock their feet out from underneath them. And sometimes raters will provide really severe ratings because they're hoping that the person will be able to show that they've improved at the next evaluation period. I think I kind of mentioned this on a previous lecture, the idea that, I'll give my employees all 4s at the first rating so that when I rate them, in 6 months or next year, they can show improvement. Because the truth is, I feel like they were all 5s right now, but I'm going to give them all 4s so that next time I can give them all 5s and it'll look like they grew. So sometimes the severity is intended to cause improvement. And sometimes it kind of makes sense. Like if you're giving your new employees 5s, then all we have left to do on their next time is they have to go to a 6 to show any kind of improvement, or else it looks like they've just sort of stagnated in their job. And so I can kind of see the logic on that baseline for improvement argument. It's usually not a great way to try and motivate employees to be super severe with them. But you can kind of see the logic of why people make these kind of rating errors. The thing about all of these is that they cause what's called range restriction, where all of the employees are sort of scoring within, a couple of points of each other. And that really starts to affect morale if they start figuring out that everybody's getting the same basic rating. No matter how hard you work or how little you work, you're getting the same basic rating. That kind of can undermine the go-getters and make them think, what's the point? And it can also undermine the lazy people because they figure, I can continue being lazy because, look, I'm getting the same ratings as this person who's working a lot harder. That person's kind of a sucker. Look at me. I figured out the system. So it's not a great process to have these kind of distributional errors. We want to have correct ratings. So some other rare errors are going to really reflect those sort of cognitive errors that I was referring to earlier. Recency error, this refers to raters really relying really heavily on what has happened recently. So if there's been a lot of negativity going on, right, undesirable behaviors or whatever going on right before the evaluation period, it may be inordinately, reported on the performance evaluation, even though maybe for the weeks leading up to that negative period, like maybe the person's been absent a number of days and it's because they've been sick or something like that. And it's the most recent thing that the supervisor can really remember. And they're like, it seems like they're never here. And in fact, they hadn't missed a day up until, these last couple of days. It can really interfere with accurate ratings of the employee. First impression or primacy effect is sort of the flip of recency error. This is where the first experience that you've had with the employee really just sort of sets the scene for how the whole rating is going to go. So maybe the first month that the employee was on the job, they were struggling with the new systems and other kinds of things. And by the last month prior to rating, they've really gotten it under their belt. They're really doing a good job. The rater may overemphasize those early months in their own mind. They might be like, I don't know, they really struggled. Even though they're doing a great job now, I'm focusing on my first impression. So there can be a good side on that. If you come in gangbusters, everybody's like, wow, you are really exceeding expectations as a brand new employee. And then you start slacking off towards the end of the assessment period. That coming in gangbusters might be the thing that is remembered better. And that may appear in the evaluation. The similar to me error is exactly what it sounds like. Raters tend to give more favorable ratings to employees who are like themselves. So we do see some benefits to having a rater who is the same sex or the same age or has the same kinds of life circumstances as a rater. If you match, a lot of times you'll sort of forgive errors or not even notice them, because you start getting if you're at all familiar from social psychology, if you get the in-group out-group bias, right? So if I perceive you to be a member of my group based on whatever I'm defining that as at the moment, it could be my sex or my age or my religion or my race, or it could be anything. Whatever I'm viewing as the thing we share, it makes the rater feel like, well, we're in the same in-group, and people who are in my in-group have all these good characteristics because they're like me. So then I rate more easily, right? And then people who are in the out-group who aren't like me, I might rate more harshly. So that leads us into the need for rater training so we can avoid these problems. So let's go ahead and stop here, and we'll come back in the next segment. We'll talk about how to train raters.